with Censation, where we discuss student rights and how they apply to the First Amendment. Today with me we have Bruce Ellingson. Welcome to the show, Bruce.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely.
Looking forward
Thank
to
you.
the conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. And we're going to get things moving right along. So, Bruce, can you tell us a little about what you do here at the college?
I am a full professor of digital media. This is my 31st year at Buena Vista University, and currently I'm the advisor of KBBU, which is the student radio station. And before that, I was the advisor for the TAC, which is the student newspaper.
So you have plenty of experience with student rights as far as press and even, like you were saying, radio and everything like that. Can you tell us a little bit about just kind of general experience with working with students as far as publications and press goes?
So my background is that as an undergraduate student, I was the editor of my own student newspaper, The Advocate, at Morehead State, and then worked for 10 years as a journalist in the newspaper business before coming back and earning my master's and then coming here. And so I have 15 years of experience with the student press here, and that would be 15 years of 15 different co-managing editors and 15 different staffs and 15 different news and journalistic issues, and then 13 years at KBBU. And KBBU is a little bit more about entertainment than it is about journalism, but of course there are still free speech issues.
Yeah, such as like FCC rules about what you can say online or on the on air. And such,
well, and that's sort of interesting because when I arrived at BV, I began advising the student newspaper, and the student newspaper answers to no one. There are no forms that one has to submit on an annual basis. There are no rules that one has to meet that are specific to a small college or a state. And with a radio station, on an annual basis, you're making reports. On a daily basis, you're concerned about FCC rules. There are certain words that you don't want to say. There are certain topics you can't discuss. So I have seen it from both sides. And the only experience I have not had is television, so I have no idea what the rules are for cable TV. But I think there may be more like...
Similar to the radios.
Yeah, I think actually more like newspapers.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Awesome. Well, we're going to jump into, we're going to go off of some cases, famous cases, and then we'll discuss kind of how you feel towards the cases or any experiences you have relating to the cases. So I'm going to start off with some background information on the cases that we're going to go over. First off, we're going to have Minersville versus Gobitis, 1939. It was Lillian and William Gobitis, and they were choosing not to salute to the flag, which they did every day at school. Obviously, the school wasn't happy with this, and they took it to court, and Gobitis actually lost. Later, though, they had the Barnett versus West Virginia case, which was very similar. In this case, though, the students that were choosing not to salute won the case. Also, we're going to go over Tinker versus Des Moines, which was students wanting to protest, and they wore armbands to school, and they got in trouble for that. Next, we'll go over Morse versus Frederick, which was at a school rally where students had a sign that said "Bong hits for Jesus," which they lost that case. So, can you tell us anything about your experience with kind of the unpopular speech? Any unpopular speech that was ever used and you were kind of either involved in it or saw it happen?
Here we go. Well, that's a good question. I haven't thought about my unpopular speech for years. Well, you can just stop me at any time. And if I go too long, you say, okay,
you go right ahead.
Just stop and talk. This reminds me a little bit of a course that I had when I was working on my master's at the University of Missouri. And it was a course in communication law and ethics. And the teacher taught the course about law as a course that operated on the notion that free speech is always about unpopular speech. That, in fact, the First Amendment, with its 5 freedoms, is there to protect not your popular speech, because your popular speech doesn't need protecting. When you say things that everybody in the room agrees with, you're pretty well protected. But when you're saying things that people find obnoxious or vulgar or somehow anti-government or anti-administration, anti-authority, then then the question is, how far can you go
Mm-hmm.
with that unpopular speech before people can stop you?
Mm-hmm.
And so through the course of law history, there have been a number of decisions about how far that does go. And you know, one way to think about how much freedom we have regarding our speech is the case in which the outcome was decided on the question of, do you have a right to cry fire in a crowded theater?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer was, when you put other people's personal safety at risk, or when you're putting an institution at risk,
Mm-hmm.
that's when your rights may very well come into a question of balance and your freedoms may be stopped.
Okay.
So, I mean, in a broad answer to your question, it would be all the way back to when I was in grad school at the University of Missouri, and my teacher said to me, really the history of speech is the history of we have to find out what's unpopular, what people don't like, and then we look at that and we determine, were they supported in their unpopular speech, or were they denied by the Supreme Court
Mm-hmm.
or others
Yeah.
that right to speech?
So that goes into obviously like harming somebody would obviously be if your words can hurt somebody in some way, then obviously that would kind of bridge, as well as I mentioned, the case with the Morse versus Frederick. They talked about the bong hits for Jesus. The school actually claimed that it was promoting illegal drugs, so that would fit under the causing an institution to be harmed.
So go back to the first two. So the
Sure.
first two cases are
Minersville versus Gobitis, and the Barnett.
decision there is
They went for Minersville. They claimed that Gobitis argued that it was against their religion for their children to be forced into this saluting the flag.
Salute to the flag,
Mhm.
right?
And the court ended up saying that it was not under that kind of area of religion.
Okay, and then the second case?
The second case was Barnett versus West Virginia, which was the case after that followed the same issue about whether the students should be required to have to salute to the flags.
And how did that turn out?
That one actually was won by Barnett.
It feels to me that, you know, one thing that we're always doing is we're looking at the time period and the context of the matter. And 1939, during 1939, we're at a period where we're right at the beginnings of World War II.
Yeah.
We're not in it yet, but it's certainly, you know, right there internationally as a concern. We've finished World War I. World War I is in the teens, and then from World War I all the way up to World War II, we're in a state of economic depression and agricultural difficulties because of climate.
Yeah.
And so we're at a period where, you know, there's a lot of turmoil and there's a lot of questions about how much freedom should we have, and even the question, I think, at times, how much freedom potentially does damage to the nation that we all know and love. And so the decisions that you're seeing here oftentimes relate to what are the circumstances of the times, how have they changed?
Yeah.
And so whether we salute a flag or whether we don't salute a flag is probably not, there's not an absolute answer to which is right and which is wrong. The question is, given the context, what makes sense at the time? And right now, we've got the question in front of the Supreme Court of gay marriage. And, you know, this is an idea we've been working through, well, you know, we've been working through gay rights for as long as I've been living, and so that means that this has been an issue that's been going on for 40 or 50 years in sort of the public debate. And now we're finally to the Supreme Court, where it could be that the outcome is that if two men or two women wish to marry, they might, anywhere they wish in this country. And that's a huge change, and that change results from the fact that the country has changed, not that the right answer to this is any different than it was 20 or 40 years ago.
It's a time and place.
It's a time and place, yeah, very much.
Yeah.
And so Tinker and Moyne, I think, is really important and probably makes more sense to me because I was your age, right?
Okay.
So cases you cited earlier were before I was
okay.
born, so I have no personal experience. But when the Tinker family and friend go into their school district in Des Moines wearing a black armband,
Yeah.
they're protesting the war in Vietnam. And this is happening, I think it actually happened about 1965, 1966. The case was decided in 69.
Yep.
And I'm in high school.
Yeah.
You know, I'm virtually the same age that they are. And then I'm in college. And I'm on a campus where on a monthly basis there are protests against the war in Vietnam. There are demonstrations. And in fact, during my undergraduate year, I was at Morehead State College then. Morehead State College during spring semester, about 1 month into the spring quarter, we were on a quarter system, was shut down by students. All classes were canceled, and you had the option of either taking the grade that you'd earned, or you could remain and you could take free university classes and get the grades based on those free university classes. And so we had classes on issues like free speech and racism and the war and war policies, etc.
Wow.
So Tinker versus Des Moines is just an incredibly important moment, because here the question is, can students march into a high school wearing a black armband? Do faculty or administrators at that high school have a right to say, this is going to disrupt classes, it's going to cause difficulty? Or do the students have a right to say, well, we're citizens in this country, and the First Amendment, we haven't talked much about it, but the First Amendment is Congress shall make no laws, and then by extension, eventually states shall make no laws, and then by extension, public schools shall make no laws. I mean, that's sort of the way it was being interpreted. And then we have Tinker. Tell me about the Tinker case. What happened?
Tinker, essentially, well, as you were saying, they were protesting the Vietnam War. They wore the black armbands.
Yeah.
Faculty, teachers told them they couldn't in class, that it was disruptive to the class, so they ended up taking it to court. Eventually, they ended up winning it. So.
Yeah, and the kids were, get this, 8, the Tinker kids, 8, 11, 13, and 15, and 16. So the kids, 5 kids, 4 Tinkers and 1 other, were all 16 or under. And if I remember the case correctly, the school got wind that this was going to happen and created a policy saying that you can't, you know, the armbands would be disruptive, and if you were asked to remove them, you must. And the students decided that they weren't going to, and therefore they were kicked out of school, and have ultimately won this case in the Supreme Court. A key case, because what it said was that you don't leave your rights as a citizen at the door of the school, and that when you go to school, you're not giving up something that you've earned as a citizen of the United States, even if you're 8 or 13, which is pretty amazing.
They are very young, So, yeah, it was definitely a landmark case as far as student rights go, and especially with protests too. So
now, a couple other cases that sort of relate to that. Maybe you're going to get to them. If we're going to stay in school and we're going to talk about the rights of free speech, Hazelwood.
Oh yeah, definitely. That one we're going to get to.
School. So if you're going to get to them,
we can go over Bethel now, and then I'll get to the Hazel one in a moment here.
So so I'm in high school.
Okay.
And when I'm in high school, I was not the editor of my high school paper. I was the editor of my college paper. When I'm in college, I expect that I have all the First Amendment rights. So how does Bethel change that in any way? Tell me about
Bethel. It was Bethel School District against Fraser. And what the issue was students not having the right for the obscene, was it the speeches?
It was what we have is we have a high school election going on, and we have a campaign manager. So this is you. You know, Spencer is the guy running for president. And you're the campaign manager. And so the campaign manager is Matthew Fraser. And Matthew gets up in front of the school at a convocation in order to speak on behalf of the fellow who's running for the president. and he uses innuendo and double entendre and talks about the firmness of his candidate and the climax of this whole race. And he's, you can imagine sitting in a high school with some guy getting up there and talking about firmness and jabbing.
Suggestive
yes.
language.
And of course, all the high school kids were
getting a kick out of it.
They knew exactly what was going on. And at this point, he can't be stopped, right?
No.
Because it's only suggestive.
Yeah.
But after this, then they say, I think they kick him out of school, as a matter of fact. Or I think what they do is they take maybe him out of the of the race for president. I think they diminish Fraser's rights. I think that he is someone who might speak at the commencement day speeches, and they deny him that right.
Yeah.
And so he's losing his rights as a result of
pretty much entirely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, the Supreme Court says that his free speech rights were not violated by the school. So what we have here then, so in '69, the Supreme Court says to Mary Beth Tinker and and the rest of her siblings, you have a right to symbolically say what you want at school. And then in '87, so this is just about 20 years later. And if you think about this, and you think about the context, in '69 we're sort of at the end of the war in Vietnam, or just about done with the war in Vietnam. Campuses are sort of crazy, radicalized. I don't know if that's true about University College at the time or not. Lots of student protest, and the Supreme Court sides with the students. In 1987, Ronald Reagan is president. I would sort of argue that the country is in some ways more conservative. It's certainly quieter. We're at a period of time where economy is the primary concern, and what the Supreme Court decides is that free speech rights can be constrained, and that when you do enter the schoolhouse door, maybe things change for you.
Some things are left.
Some things may be left at the curb.
Interesting.
That's a big change.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it really shows that the time and place kind of thing really shines out, and then just what the culture is at that time, and I guess just the time in general.
You know, the armband, and it's talked about as speech, as I know you know, is a symbolic reference to your opposition to an idea. And instead of saying I oppose this idea, you wear an armband to prove it. That would be called something that's commonly phrased as political speech in free speech terms. And there's been this history in this country that political speech is kind of special. That when it's speech about the nature of our democracy, the nature of our politics, our Constitution, our history, our rights in this country, that's very special, and it's guarded as much as it can be. Now, I don't know how far you want to take this, but Matt Fraser was speaking on behalf of political candidates. And so I'll bet you that he claimed that was political speech.
Exactly.
Which would certainly be speech as protected as it could be. But in that school, it was said, hey, he's really not speaking political speech. He's being disruptive. He's trying to make this a laughing stock. Exactly. He's trying to destroy this political activity that we've got going, and we want our students to
almost
take
like
serious.
an anti.
It really is. Exactly right. Well, in a way, he's almost wearing a black armband.
Because he's being
protesting the nature of what politics is like in high school, making a joke about it, making fun.
Which, I mean, you see a lot today. I mean, comedians, it's one of the main things we joke about anymore is politics. So definitely times change. So. Now you mentioned the Hazelwood versus Kohlmeyer, which is kind of in the next area that we're getting into, which is prior restraint and review. So you have prior restraint, which is the ability it usually involves with schools and such, but it can go outside of that. You have prior restraint, which is the ability to kind of stop a publication from going out there,
Yeah.
while on the other hand you have prior review, which is they're allowed to see it, review it, look through it before it goes out there. So Hazelwood versus Kohlmeyer, you had an administrator that actually took out these, he reviewed and I believe took out these 2 articles that were supposed to be published because he didn't agree with the content that was inside of it. I believe one of them was about students being pregnant,
Yeah.
and the other one was about divorce, yes.
Well, so the Supreme Court disagrees here and says that the administrators can, in fact.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so again, time and place is important. So what year is this? 1988.
In 1988. So this is close to the one we were just discussing.
So if we go back to Mary Beth Tinker, that's 1969. A time when in this country there's lots of controversy and lots of protests, and Tinker wins.
Yes.
But then, following that, we see the rights and the privileges of school children begin to be shaved away, and so there's in '69 it's pretty clear, and actually prior to '69 it seemed pretty clear too that you don't leave your rights at the schoolhouse door, but slowly they get sort of shaved and shaped, and so now in 1988 we have a principal who is doing, which I don't know, this maybe you've had this experience. Principals routinely reviewed material that the student press published in high school for years. That was not uncommon. So that would be reviewing something in advance of its publication. You call it prior review. That was not unusual. What was unusual about this was that when the principal saw these 2 articles about pregnancy and divorce, which, and we should come back to this, which in 1988 did not seem to me to be very controversial. Yes, it was, 30 years ago, but I don't know about this. So he just pulls the pages out. It's a 6-page paper and it gets published as 4 pages and doesn't say anything to anybody until it hits the streets, and the students pick it up and they turn it and they open it up and they go, where did our good stuff go? Yeah. I mean, that's really what they're saying. And the Supreme Court says, yeah, I mean, that's it. There are times when, as with Mr. Fraser, that you have to control students in the school building because we have other stuff that we're doing here. It's not just about all people having the right to speak their minds at all times. It's about people needing to study and learn and find out about biology and improve their bodies, etc. And so there's a clear line here when suddenly it feels like the school administration is now in the position of deciding what rights it is that students have when they come through the schoolhouse door.
Yeah, definitely. So have you ever seen any of this, like in your experiences? Have you ever had anybody get, any student publications get restrained or?
So, I mean, it's really interesting to me. So I'm in high school when Mary Beth Tinker goes through Tinker versus Des Moines, and was not on the school newspaper, though I was the subject of an article, and I was also someone involved a bit with the annual, and I don't remember in any instance administrators somehow constraining us. Okay. But I also don't remember any instance. I graduated in 1967. So this is really sort of before the kind of the revolution that occurs. I also don't remember any of us pushing on that, challenging them. Okay. Saying things or doing things that the administration might not like. Lots of that happened when I was in college, and I was the editor of my student newspaper, the Morehead State newspaper, The Advocate. And we had an advisor, and the advisor went with us when we pasted up, when we organized the pages of the newspaper and actually printed that newspaper. And so, in a way, sort of depending upon how you feel about advisors, in a way, the advisor was somebody who had prior review. Okay. Right? So they did get the prior review, they just didn't do so much. They was always there looking over our shoulder, just as I'm here with KBB looking over their shoulders, and Jamie's doing the same thing with the TAC. I would sort of guess that KBVUers and taxters would not think of Jamie as a
Mhm.
prior reviewer
Yeah.
or me as a prior reviewer. But we are adults who are sort of recognized as
Yeah.
representing the institution. There was never a time that our student advisor, our faculty advisor of the student newspaper, said to us, "You can't publish that."
Mhm.
But as a student newspaper, we once thought it would be a really cool idea, all of us, to go to a local movie that was advertised as edgy and R-rated.
Okay.
Remember, this is the 1960s, so you'd see this now on network TV.
Yep. Yep.
Maybe a bare butt on the screen or
Yeah.
something. And we went to that movie and decided we would do as a staff,
Mhm.
and we decided we'd do a review of the movie,
Okay.
and we'd run a picture. And I think it was sort of the curve of a naked woman's side.
Okay.
It certainly wasn't anything that you'd think provocative today. And we ran that picture, and as it happened, the advisor didn't go along with us to our publication point, and so he never saw that
Okay.
until it was published.
So then it was too late. So
It was, but he wasn't happy about it.
Oh, okay.
He and I and the rest of the staff ended up in the president's office, and
Oh.
we got one of these.
Ah,
You shouldn't
okay.
be doing that
Mm.
kind of rules. But otherwise, I've never been in a position where prior restraint is really a complex idea.
Yeah.
And it's really important. It's the idea that I might not like what you say. You might say vulgar things or stupid things or obscene things, but what we should do is let you say them
Mhm.
or let you show them. And then after the fact, we'll punish you. A lot of people would say, well, isn't it kind of late? Well, but our country is based on this notion that we should never stop people because there might be some value in
Yeah.
what they're saying or doing or showing. So prior restraint is really, if you're in the press, as bad as it gets.
Mhm.
And I have never had the experience in 31 years as a person who advised radio or television, or radio or newspaper, I mean, that I was restrained in advance by some administrator at an institution. But the FCC regulates KBVU.
Yeah.
And KBVU is not allowed, in advance it's not allowed,
Mhm.
to use a series of words that I won't repeat here,
Yeah.
but are in our KBVU handbook, and you may have seen them,
Yes.
because they're not right for the public airwaves.
Mhm. And that also kind of falls under kind of a time and place.
It is.
Certain hours.
Very
and
much, yeah.
if you-
Safe
people
harbor,
listening.
the idea
Yep.
that, between 7 in the morning and 10 at night, small children
Yep.
might be listening to KBVU. Actually, I think small children are our typical audience. And we should not be using words that could
Mhm.
corrupt or do damage to small children.
Mhm.
Or talking about ideas that might do that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So I don't know, is that prior restraint? Is the FCC restraining us in advance?
It's a good question. Just restrictions in general? That's a good question. That's a good question. Actually, it looks like we're out of time, sadly. But I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank you for your knowledge and expertise and wisdom. And I want to thank, of course, the viewers for watching. So thank you again. for
Yeah,
being
great.
here.
And
Yeah.
the idea of First Amendment rights is so
Mhm.
important. And
Oh,
everybody
definitely.
at a university ought to be aware of the
Yeah.
5 rights and ought to be concerned about making sure that their 5 rights are in fact kept free.
Definitely, definitely. Whether you're part of the TAC or KBVU or not.
Or just somebody who's
Mhm.
out there chalking out a sidewalk.
Yep, yep. It all applies. So awesome. Well, thank
Thanks,
you again.
Tyler.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you everybody, and we'll see you later.
This is how it should be done. This is how it should be done.